What do you do when trouble comes? You just found out that a family member has cancer or a close friend has cancer. You just found out a family member or a close friend, they lost their job. What if the trouble comes personally to you, actually, and you're the one that has cancer? You're the one that's having troubles. And especially because you're a Christian. What or who do you turn to during times of trouble and problems when they come? Because it's not a matter of if, it's really when. Because the Bible, Jesus promised we are going to have troubles. We're going to be persecuted for our faith. We're going to be mocked. And so it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. This world is cursed by sin. And so there is going to be sickness. There is going to be death. There is going to be troubles in this life. But who or what do you turn to? Is it food? Is it the TV? Is it hobbies? Is it going on a spending spree? Turning to alcohol or turning to any other things when really we should be turning to the Lord? And Psalm 3, David is our example in this. That he has a crisis, that his life is falling apart at this time. And he turns to the Lord. And he turns to the Lord and puts his confidence in God. And so when troubles come, when sickness comes, when people mock your faith, and the list can go on and on, when these things come, we can find that you're not alone. But David here, the Bible shows us what David and how he responded to trouble. Look at Psalm chapter 3, verse 1. A psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. O Lord, how my adversaries have increased. Many are rising up against me. Not every psalm has a title in it, but this psalm does. And it's here for a very purpose and a reason. You know, this psalm tells us that David, first and foremost, is the author. But not only are you told that David is the author, you're told the whole reason he wrote this. The situation that happened in his life for why he wrote this. And it comes a point when his whole life is falling apart. That here his son, not a friend, not a stranger, not some foreign military that's coming, but his own son who betrays him and seeks to overthrow him. It's his son, Absalom, that he had to flee from. His son Absalom, David really, let me back for a moment. David had multiple wives. And so he had children from multiple wives. Absalom had a sister named Tamar. And well, Tamar is described as a beautiful young woman who another brother, half-brother, name of Amnon, lusted after, was obsessed by her. And instead of getting good counsel from a friend, his friend gives him bad counsel, wicked counsel, that you should pretend you are sick. And when your father comes to see you, tell him that your sister Tamar that if she would just make you some food, make you a meal and feed it to you, that would help immensely and greatly. But he wasn't sick. And so she goes and gets close, and he sends everyone out of the room. And he rapes her. Well, this makes David angry. But he never, for some reason or another, he never punishes Amnon. And so Absalom decides to plot revenge. 2 years pass, and he has this opportunity. Invites all his brothers, and I think his sisters as well, and sisters, and he kills them, Amnon. And then he flees and spends 3 years as a refuge. And King David misses his son and allows them to come back, but yet changes his mind about allowing him to come and see him. So now Absalom is now allowed back at Jerusalem and in Israel. But for 2 years, he's not allowed to see his father's face. And it's probably during this time the resentment is building up against his father for one reason or another. I'm assuming it's during these last 2 years when he wasn't allowed to come to see his father. But who knows? The Bible does not tell us when. But what we do know is he's plotting. He begins to plot to usurp his father, David, from his throne. Because after I mentioned that 2 years he's plotting revenge on Amnon, 3 years he flees, and then he's allowed back, and so for 2 years he's not allowed to see his father's face while being in the area. And then he's finally allowed to come before him. And so this is where 2 Samuel 15, verse 1 through 6 pick up. Now it came about after this, that is, when he finally got to see his father, that Absalom provided for himself a chariot and horses and 50 men as runners before him. Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way to the gate, and when any man had a suit to come to the king for judgment, Absalom would call him and say, "From what city are you?" And he would say, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "See, your claims are good and right, but no man listens to you on part of the king." Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, that one would appoint me judge in the land. Then every man who has any suit or cause could come to me, and I would give him justice." And when a man came near to prostrate before him, he would put out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. In this manner Absalom dealt with all of Israel who came to the king for judgment. And so Absalom stole away the hearts of the men of Israel. He deceives the people. He begins to become tricky. After he finally sees his father, there isn't really reconciliation. David may think there is, and forgiveness, but on Absalom's part, there's deception. He deceives the people and causes them to distrust and be dissatisfied with his father, their king, on how things are being handled. You're not getting the just case. You're not being heard. But you know what? If I was a judge, then you would be able to get your case settled. You would have your problems heard. And yet, he deceives them. He conceals his true intentions, what he's going to do. He didn't say first of king. He says a judge. If I was just one of the judges, I would be wise and I would handle your case. And he deceives, he steals away the hearts of the people. And it probably also helps if you because of the way the Bible describes him as in his looks. I mean, 2 Samuel 14:25. Now in all Israel was no one as handsome as Absalom, so highly praised from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no defect in him. He was a good-looking guy, and he was able to use that to his advantage and use deception. And it was after his 40th birthday, near the end of actually 40 years, he began to put his plan in action and deceived his father David. He lies and tells him, I'm going to Hebron, which is the place of worship where the tabernacle is, because the temple has not been built. That will be when Solomon is king. But I'm going to go worship God. I have made vows to God, and so I need to make the appropriate sacrifices to God to complete my vows. I got to pay on them. I'm going to worship God. And that's what 2 Samuel 15, 7 through 11 tells us. Now it came about at the end of 40 years that Absalom said to the king, please let me go and pay my vow, which I vowed to the Lord in Hebron. For your servant vowed a vow while I was living in Geshur in Aram. That's where he was hiding in refuge. That's where he was for 3 years. Saying, if the Lord shall indeed bring me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord. And notice that here, he is using, he's not using Adonai. He's using Yahweh's name, the most sacred name of God. As I say, especially to the Jews. The king said to him, go in peace. So he arose and went to Hebron. But Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom is king in Hebron. Then 200 men went with Absalom from Jerusalem, who were invited and went innocently, and they did not know anything. They didn't know anything about this plot that's going on. The next part of his plan is to send for Ahithophel. Ahithophel, that's a mouthful to say of that name there, but Ahithophel was David's best counselor. He's one that when he would give counsel as if God was speaking. That's how trustworthy his counsel was. But now Ahithophel is going to betray David and is in on the plot, no doubt, before this. Ahithophel was also most likely Bathsheba's grandfather. 2 Samuel 15:12 says, and Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor from his city Gilo, while he was offering the sacrifices. And the conspiracy was strong, for the people increased continually with Absalom. And so, just to send for someone, he has probably been on these plans for a while. This plan of revolt, waiting for the right time. He probably joined because, as I mentioned, he was Bathsheba's grandfather. And think about what David did. David committed immorality with Bathsheba, tried to cover up his sin by first trying to get Uriah the Hittite to get drunk and to sleep with his wife so that he would think that child is his. And when that plan didn't work out, he sets in plot to have Uriah the Hittite murdered. And so Ahithophel was probably bitter from that situation of what David did. And notice that Ahithophel was not at Jerusalem where he normally would be at, but he's at his hometown. This would give him the advantage of being able to go to where Absalom is with greater ease, that he doesn't have to explain where he's going to the king. But he's already at home, and he can go wherever he wants. And notice also, not just a few. We know that there's 200 that are there innocently. But it says many were continually joining in this revolt. And as soon after this comes that David is warned of this revolt and is told, you need to flee for your life. Because it's not just one or two people. It's not 100. It is almost the whole nation. It's a part of this revolt. 2 Samuel 15:13 through 14. Then a messenger came to David, saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, arise and let us flee, for otherwise none of us will escape from Absalom. Go in haste, or he will overtake us quickly, and bring down calamity on us, and strike the city with the edge of the sword. Most of Israel is not on David's side, their king, who they've had king for several decades by now. I mean, this is what, we find that David wrote in verse 1 that goes right along with that. Look back at verse 1 as I read. A psalm of David when he fled from Absalom his son. O Lord, how my adversaries have increased. Many are rising up against me. He calls upon the name of the Lord. O Lord, Yahweh, the great I am, the self-existent God, who is not dependent upon anyone. But how many adversaries have risen up against me. Here he is now, he has to flee. He's forced to flee, and not many go with him. There are those who do want to go with him, but he says, go back. Because some of them he sends back so that they will be able to frustrate the plans of Absalom and Ahithophel. And others he says just to stay so that they wouldn't come and die. That they should just stay. But here are many adversaries have increased. He feels outnumbered, and he really is. And that is because Absalom stole the hearts of the people. 2 Samuel 15:17 through 18. The king went out and all the people with him, and they stopped at the last house. And now all of his servants passed on beside him, all the Chetherites, all the Pethelites, and all the Gittites, 600 men who had come with him from Gath, passed on before the king. Gath is when David was fleeing from Saul, and he had men with him, his trustworthy men. 2 Samuel 15:30. And David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, and wept as he went, and his head was covered, and he walked barefoot. And then all the people who were with him each covered his head, and went up weeping as they went. And so it goes. Weeping up the Mount of Olives. The same place where Jesus was at in the garden. But wept as he went, and his head was covered. He walked barefoot. And it was at this time that David learns that not only has he been betrayed by his son, but also his closest advisor. 2 Samuel 15:31. Now someone told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, I pray, make the counsel of Ahithophel foolishness. So David is outnumbered. His life is fallen apart. His life is in danger, in mortal danger. But look at what he says in verse 3. These adversaries. Many are saying to my soul, there is no deliverance for him in God. People were telling David that God will not help you. God has abandoned you. And these people were speaking lies about God. They did not know what God had planned in all this. They don't know why this is happening, but they automatically assume that God has abandoned you, David. God does not care. And there is one who particularly delighted in saying that to David in the revolt. You know, some may have told him that because that's the way they felt at times. That maybe some of the people who were with him felt that way because here's this situation. But here there are those who were doing that mockingly and meanly. There is one who particularly delighted in doing that. In the revolt, he delighted in what was happening to David. He was one who was saying, God will not help you. He cursed at David. He threw stones at David and all with them. And that man's by the name of Shimei. 2 Samuel 16, 5-8 tells us that. When King David came to Bahurim, behold, there came out from there a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. He came out cursing continually as he came. He threw stones at David and at all the servants of King David. Now, when we think of cursing, not necessarily curse words, but yet invoking God's name to bring a curse down upon someone is how that could be used as well. And all the people and all the mighty men were at his right hand and at his left. Thus Shimei said when he cursed, get out, you man of bloodshed and worthless fellow. The Lord has returned upon you all the bloodshed of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. And behold, you are taken in your own evil, for you are a man of bloodshed. And so he was invoking God's name. That God is cursing you, David. God has abandoned you. God is not going to help you. God is punishing you. Well, David's not the one that, because this guy thinks that David stole the throne, when it was really God gave the throne to David, and God had promised the throne to David. And one of David's men wanted to kill Shimei. But this was David's response to that. You would think that David said, yeah, go ahead and do that. 2 Samuel 16, 10-13, David is at a low point. But the king said, what have I to do with you, O sons of Zeruiah? If he curses, and if the Lord has told him, curse David, then who shall say, why have you done so? Then David said to Abishai and to all his servants, behold, my son who came out for me seeks my life. How much more now this Benjamite? Let him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has told him. Perhaps the Lord will look on my affliction and return good to me instead of his cursing this day. So David's men went on the way, and Shimei went along the hillside, parallel with him. And as he went, he cursed and cast stones and threw dust at him. He didn't just stand away from the past. He is actually following them for a time. And cursing, God is against you, David. You know, have you ever felt that God's abandoned you in your time of trouble, your time of suffering? Have you ever felt that there's no help from God? There's no relief. Where is God during the midst of this? And thinking, what is the use of turning to God for help? Or maybe you felt that God can help me, but does He really care about my problem to help me? I know He has the power. I know God is in control. I know God is sovereign. I know that He's all wise and all powerful. But does He really care about my situation? Maybe you felt either one of those. But look how David responds to trouble. Not knowing if he's really going to survive this situation. Not knowing if he's going to return as king again. And so how does he respond? Look at verse 3. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, and the one who lifts up my head. First, he looks to God as your protector. When troubles and trials come, God is your shield. God is your protector. David made a wise choice and turned to the Lord in prayer. He did not believe the lies of those who told him God has abandoned you. God's not going to help you, David. You're getting what you deserve. Well, David put his confidence in the Lord. And he boasted that the Lord was his shield. His life was falling apart. And part of this was because of, I should say, part of this was God had said what was going to happen. Because of what he did with Bathsheba. God said, the sword will not depart from your house. And that this would happen. And this is a result of his sin. But even then, God was gracious and is gracious. We'll see this week and as well as next when we will finish the second half of the psalm. But David put his confidence in the Lord. He boasted the Lord was his shield. You know, during battles, David would use shields to protect himself. You would have large and small, just depending on the size, and that would protect part of your body. But this is not what he says, that here God is this small shield. He says, you're a shield about me. You know, a shield that's all around him, protecting him from all sides. God is a shield, protecting. This shield cannot be broken. This shield cannot be defeated. This shield cannot get around him. Around, because it's God who protects him on all sides. He's trusting in God who cares for him and cares about him and in the situation, even when this was brought about because of his sin years before. But still, he puts his trust in the all-powerful God, knowing that no one can hurt him unless God allows it. God was all that he had during this time. But because God was all that he had, God was all he needed. Because God is all-powerful. God is the one who sits on his throne. God is the one that is in control of all things. And this is not the only time that David has ever referred to God as a shield. Psalm 7:10, my shield is with God who saves the upright in heart. My shield. God is my protection. God is protecting me. Another way we could say, God is my fortress. But here, God is protecting me all around. He is the one that's protecting me. He is the one in control. Look at verse 3 again. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, and the one who lifts up my head. He calls God his glory. And this can mean different things. We know the glory of the Lord. Talk about God, that God has glory. And you got the glory of the temple. You got that here. But God has given glory to David because God has put David as king. That means God has given him honor. God in a position of authority. But now he has been betrayed, especially by his son, by his trusted counselor. His life is crumbling. He has people telling him God will not help him. But because he says, you are my glory, he is trusting God to restore him and deliver him from this trial. Look at verse 3 that also builds upon when he says, God is the one who lifts my head, which means he's trusting the Lord will give him courage and peace during this time, and as well as restore him back to being king. David put his trust in God. David was reflecting upon his relationship and looking back to what God had done for him. No doubt calling things to mind, knowing that because he had this confidence, God will put me back. God will lift my head out of this. God's going to restore me. Knowing that God did not do all this for him just to have him murdered by his own son. Because God had promised in 1 Chronicles 28:6 and 7, he said to me, your son Solomon is the one who shall build my house and my courts, for I have chosen to be a son to me, and I will be a father to him, and I will establish his kingdom forever. if he resolutely performs my commandments and my ordinances as is done now. Now this promise comes after this betrayal. But God had made this promise found in Samuel before the insurrection. I will be here 2 Samuel 7:14. I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me. When he commits iniquity, I will correct him with the rod of men and the strokes of the Son of Men. And we know that's speaking of ultimate Messiah, but God was talking about Solomon first, the initial fulfillment. And so he, with confidence, he cried to God for help to restore him. He put his confidence in the Lord, that Lord didn't bring him through all these things, make this promises that here I'm going to put one of your sons on the throne. That here he'll be a son to me. Didn't promise to do these things for him, and yet just to have him murdered by one of his sons, and to have him go out like that, rather than to die and then a son takes his place. But with confidence he cried to God to help and restore him, as even with Psalm 9:13, be gracious to me, O Lord, see my affliction from those who hate me, you who lift me up from the gates of death. And other places that he put his confidence in the Lord. Look at verse 4. I was crying to the Lord my voice in Psalm 3. And he answered me from his holy mountain. It's the Lord that he turns to. It's the Lord that he cries out to. I was crying to the Lord my voice. To hear that's that name again. Not Adonai, which would be appropriate name. Because he's king. Adonai, God is king. God is this majestic king, master, who is a ruler. But Yahweh, the self-existent God, the one who isn't dependent upon anyone, who all man is dependent upon, the great I am. I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he answered me from his holy mountain. So he turns to the Lord for help. Not man, but God. David knew what was being said about God was a lie. David had so much confidence that God heard him and did not abandon him, but also answered his prayers. That here he's believing that God has already begun the process of answering his prayers. That he has that confidence in God. He can't see what the answer is right now. He can't see the outcome of what's going on. But his confidence is in God during this, that God will take care of this, that God cares. God has not abandoned me. But God is my refuge. God is my shield. God is my hope. So he turned to that. For you, God is your protection. He is your shield in time in times of trouble. He is all powerful. He cannot be defeated. He cannot be overthrown. He's more powerful. And then you could name it: man, trials, suffering, cancer, heart disease, disasters, demons, Satan. Satan is called a dragon in the Bible. You know that he is more powerful than we are. But that dragon is on a chain. And the one who's holding that chain is God. Satan cannot do anything outside the will of God. And so there's nothing to fear in life. Your trials and what you face may seem big at the time. The death of a loved one, the death of a friend, losing your job, cancer, suffering, trials, the things going on, but God is greater. God is more powerful than those things. You turn to him. He's your shield. He is your protector. He is the one that we know that works all things together for good. Really causes all things to work together for good. The things that He directly brings in our life, as well as the things He allows, whether good or bad by our definition, He uses them. And we, with confidence, know that He is using that for His glory, and He's making us more like Christ. And so our confidence can be in God. We turn to Him to protect us. He is our shield. He is our hope there. And so I want you to ask yourself, is that true of you? Do you look to God as that? Is your confidence in the Lord? Is He the one that you have your confidence in? That when suffering and disease and things happen in this life, is He the one that you turn to, or is your confidence in other stuff? Is your confidence in yourself to get you through this? Is your confidence in your possessions? Is your confidence in other people? Because your confidence should be in the Lord and God alone. And next week, we'll see how David further continues putting his confidence in the Lord. That even as he states in the following verses, he speaks of that his confidence is so much in the Lord that even though he feels surrounded on all sides, because God is a shield, he was able to go to sleep, knowing that God was watching over and protecting him.